Hey, it's Congressman Garret Graves. I just want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about the United States Capitol. This is one of the coolest buildings, and we usually have a chance to do night tours once a week to take folks from Louisiana and show them this amazing building, but unfortunately we have had to put those on hold for months and months, but we didn't want to stop that experience for you all, so we decided to record it and give you a chance to see what we explain to people and interpret to people every single week from home. So right here, this is the beginning, and you can look at this amazing corridor. This is called the Hall of Columns. I have no idea how they came up with that name, but somebody came up with it. So a little bit about this. This is all part of an expansion of the Capitol that happened as our nation grew. As we grew westward and began taking on more states, the number of members of Congress also grew. And so they had to extend the Capitol. Both wings of the Capitol were extended. This was part of the first floor expansion. Originally, this floor was marble tile that came from England. It since has been updated with tiles, marble tiles from Alabama and from New York. The columns here are Corinthian style, but they were a little bit Americanized. If you look up at the top, you'll notice that there's actually tobacco leaves up there, American tobacco leaves. This is Massachusetts marble in the columns here, and the walls, they're actually just imitation marble. They're not real, but don't tell anybody because they still look really nice. Last thing is that in addition to the 28 columns that are here in this Capitol building, there are also 18 statues. In 1864, it was determined that every state was going to be able to establish or be able to place 2 statues in the United States Capitol. So we'll move on to the next spot. Here we are, and we're right off of the Hall of Columns where we were just a few minutes ago. This is the south side of the Capitol, this sort of south corridor or wing. And this is an area of the Capitol that it really has a tribute to female members of Congress. Right behind me is a presentation on Jeannette Rankin. She was the first female member of Congress ever elected, represented the state of Montana. Her election was in 1916, began serving in 1917. She worked on women's suffrage issues and also worked on an anti-war agenda, trying to prevent the United States from going into war. There are a number of others, but let me highlight one other over here. This is Shirley Chisholm. She was a member of Congress from New York, the first female African-American congresswoman ever elected to the Congress. She was elected in 1969, or first served in 1969, and served until 1983. All right, so now we're in the crypt. You'll notice some of the statues in here. There are actually 13 statues in here, one from each of the original 13 colonies. You see these columns. There are actually 40 columns in here, 40 of them. And they play a very functional role in the Capitol. And that directly above us is the Rotunda, the largest room in the Capitol. And believe it or not, these columns actually help to support the entire dome and allow that Rotunda room to be so large and open. So this is a very functional room. It's sort of foundational, and that it's at the center of the Capitol, but down on the first floor, and having all the supporting columns in here. It's also foundational because each of the 13 original colonies are represented. Once again, foundational to America, foundational to our young nation. Let me show you something else in this room that's pretty cool. Take a look right here. You'll notice there's a roped off area, these velvet ropes, and there's a white star or compass on the floor. In this room, this is the very center of this room. This is the center of the Capitol. The entire city of Washington, D.C. is laid off that point right there. Now, what's the significance of this point and what's below it in the basement? Well, there are actually no tours allowed down there, but if nobody's looking, we'll take you down and show you anyway. Shh. Check this out. The designers of the Capitol intended that the spot right there in that glass enclosure, which is directly below the star, right below the star, was actually intended to permanently entomb George Washington's body. As you can see, the tomb is empty. There's a great story behind this. So keep in mind, George Washington, our first president, this amazing courage in declaring independence and leading our young nation. For about 40 years after his death, the Congress and the Washington family sort of had this tug of war over where his body would be permanently entombed. And as you can see, he's not here. I personally believe that George Washington's wishes ultimately prevailed. At the end of the day, Washington really didn't want America to be about him. He wanted it really to be about what we stood for, the reason that we sought and achieved our independence. It wasn't about a person, it's about our values. Hey, how'd y'all beat me up here? All right, so welcome. This is the Rotunda. This is the largest room in the Capitol, and right now we're directly below the huge dome of the United States Capitol, just right there above us. Now, up there on the underside of the dome, you can see that there's a painting there, and it's known as the Apotheosis of George Washington. You can look up and you can see that you have George Washington there, you have Lady Liberty and Lady Freedom on either side of him, you have 13 maids representing the original 13 colonies. You can come down another level and they have a artist's depiction of American history in a painting called The Frieze. The frieze starts right here above me with effectively a depiction of Columbus discovering the New World. It goes on around and shows various components of American history. And it ends right back where it started, at the Wright brothers' discovery of flight. So this room also has 8 large oil paintings depicting different scenes in American history. It starts right here with DeSoto's discovery of the Mississippi River. It goes on to this painting, which depicts Christopher Columbus' discovery of the New World. The third painting, it represents the embarkation of the Pilgrims, and the fourth one here, this is the baptism of Pocahontas. This is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. What this shows is the gentleman in the red vest actually handing the document. That's Thomas Jefferson. Sitting down in the chair is John Hancock. This is again the Declaration of Independence, which laid out the principles for the American Revolution. The next one over here is the surrender of General Burgoyne. This was the surrender of the British to George Washington in the Revolutionary War. So these last two portraits are actually my favorite. This one right here is the surrender of Lord Cornwallis. Now, this was really important. It happened in October of 1781. This surrender was the end of the last major battle of the Revolutionary War. It shows the British surrendering effectively to the Americans, to the revolutionaries. On the left, below the white flag, that's the French below the Bourbon family flag. Over here on the right, you'll see those are the Americans below the Stars and Stripes, the revolutionaries. Now, importantly, Lord Cornwallis is not in the picture, in the portrait. He didn't feel that surrendering to the revolutionaries was appropriate because, and this gives you some depiction into their mindset, he viewed them as not being worthy. So he viewed himself as being here and the revolutionaries here. When Washington saw that Lord Cornwallis was not actually offering the surrender, he similarly sent junior officers to receive the surrender from the British. Now, the last one is probably my favorite, and it speaks much of George Washington. This is Washington surrendering his military commission. Now keep in mind, General Washington, he was a general officer in the Revolutionary Army. Why would he be surrendering his military commission? Why? I think it goes to say a lot about his character and really how thoughtful he was thinking about the future of our young nation. We declared our independence from a monarchy. He wanted to ensure that our new young nation did not have a foundation on anything that even remotely resembled a monarchy, a military dictatorship, or anything along those lines. So before he took his oath of office, he ensured that he was a civilian, no longer a general officer in the Revolutionary Army. So he surrendered his military commission. and then became the first president of the United States. Once again, really an amazing man. I mentioned that this is a pretty amazing room and that we're right below the dome of the Capitol. And in the largest room, you may notice there are a number of statues in here. You look around, here you have Andrew Jackson. The next one here is Gerald Ford. After Ford, we have Ronald Reagan, then Eisenhower. Coming around to this side, you have Thomas Jefferson. Then is George Washington. Here's Hamilton, there's Grant, and the last one here is Abraham Lincoln. So what's the theme in this room? Again, Reagan, Eisenhower, Grant, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, Hamilton. What's the theme? What are all these statues? You're probably thinking that, well, hey, those are all presidents. And you're right, except for one. Hamilton. He actually wasn't a president. He was the Secretary of the Treasury, perhaps even more famous for the play, but he was not a president. But these were all really important people in American history. Each of these statues are here intentionally because of their significant role in American history. Now, you may have noticed that I've left two statues out so far. Number one is right over here, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, this statue is unique in that it wasn't placed here by a state. It was actually commissioned by the United States Congress, representing King's significant role in the civil rights movement. Let me show you one last statue in this room. Once again, not placed here by a state, but commissioned by the Congress. This is my daughter's favorite. So this shows Stanton, Mott, and Anthony, some of the leaders in the women's suffrage movement. You notice a few features of this statue that are pretty unique. Number one, you'll see in that corner there, here you have the rough uncarved portion of stone. The rumor is that that's reserved for the first woman president of the United States. Secondly, the artist intentionally left the bottom part of this statue uncarved, and it's intended to depict that there's still work to be done on the women's suffrage movement. So we're now in a pretty amazing other room of the Capitol. At one time, this was the House chamber. The House began meeting here in 1807 until 1814 when the British burned the place down. It was reopened, reconstructed in 1819, and this became the House chamber. So members of Congress would actually deliberate right here in this very room. As a matter of fact, you can look around on the floor, you'll see plaques for people like James Polk, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, and others. These all represent places where presidents, when they served in the House of Representatives, had a desk located in that very spot. There are a few other features of this room that are pretty cool. Right over here is a room called the Lindy Boggs Congressional Women's Reading Room. Now, Lindy Boggs, who's that? She was actually a congresswoman from New Orleans. Congresswoman Boggs served in place of her husband, Hale Boggs, because he died in the early 1970s in a plane crash with then Congressman Begich in Alaska. But Congresswoman Boggs was elected to replace her husband, and that room, because of her role in advancing women's issues, that room has been named after her. So downstairs in the Hall of Columns, I noted how every state has two statues in the Capitol, and we pointed out the 18 statues in that area. This is one of the, I guess I'll say, better locations in terms of more prominent in terms of having a statue. And one of Louisiana's statues is right here. This is former Louisiana Governor Huey Long. In 1854, this was actually all closed off. In 1855, they began construction on a wing expansion. They knocked out an archway. Those doors right there are the doors to the new House chamber, which was occupied for the first time in 1857. Those are the doors that the presidents walk in to enter the chamber for the annual State of the Union speech.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
So this is the, quote, new House chamber that was occupied for the first time in late 1857. This is where the House meets on a daily basis to deliberate bills, legislation, even declarations of war. This is where we vote every day. There's now an electronic voting system that was added to the House in the early 1970s. C-SPAN wasn't introduced, or video observation or video broadcast of the chamber wasn't introduced until 1979. You look around the room and you see all the different chairs. It wasn't always like this. When the chamber was first occupied, it actually had a desk for every member of Congress. But as our nation grew, they added members of Congress until they finally stopped at 435 representing the states. So now there's sort of a theater-style seating that you see here. If you look up to the front of the chamber, you see the speaker's dais or rostrum, where the speaker prevails. You may recognize that from the annual State of the Union speech. At the very top, in the top tier there, you usually have two chairs for the State of the Union speech. One includes the Speaker of the House, of course the presiding officer over the House chamber. The other is the Vice President, but not because he or she is Vice President. It's because that person serves a dual role as the President of the United States Senate. If you look behind the Speaker's dais, you'll see a bronze emblem or symbol. That is a Roman relic of civic governance. You'll notice the vertical strands or cords, sticks, that are then lashed or bound together. Those represent the idea that we're stronger together as a nation, as a government, than we are individually or apart. You also look around and you see that there's a big board up at the top, or perhaps it actually looks like 4 blue panels. That actually becomes an electronic voting board. And whenever votes are called, that lights up, as well as some of the signs on each side of the chamber above the main entrance doors, showing how much time's left on the vote, what you're voting on, and what the current vote count is. If you keep looking up, you'll notice that there are 23 white medallions encircling the chamber. Folks like Thomas Jefferson, Napoleon, Hammurabi, George Mason, and others. If you notice, they're all facing a profile vision looking toward the speaker's dais or rostrum. Just one is not a profile and is actually looking straight on. That's actually Moses, who, while all of the other medallions represent great lawgivers in American history, there's something that's unique about Moses. He was not a lawgiver in our world history. He was actually what? A law receiver. He received the laws from God and really the originator of all laws. All right, so now I just came off the House floor, the House chamber, coming down the Capitol steps, which is always one of those really awing moments because this is such a cool view here, looking out over the east front of the Capitol lawn. More importantly, this is the Library of Congress Jefferson building. This is the first Library of Congress building, the one that was initially intended to house every periodical, book, newspaper, everything ever written. You'll be shocked to learn they actually ran out of space. One of the other things that's pretty cool about this view is further over to the left side, that's the Supreme Court, where, of course, the justices deliberate on cases. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the tour. This building is absolutely amazing and it just oozes history. I hope that you were able to get just a taste of what this building has to offer, but I also want to let you know that we actually held back a few secrets. So next time you're looking for a family vacation or find yourself in Washington on a business trip, please reach out to our office. We'd love to take you on a personal behind-the-scenes tour at night of the United States Capitol. Stay well. God bless.